kicking like a girl or shooting like a girl is something that you shouldn't be doing. That's their problem, because if you're still scoring and you're still getting to the ball on time and you're still being first, you're doing it right. Doesn't matter what they say. I mean, yes, I kick like a girl and I swim like a girl and I walk like a girl and I wake up in the morning like a girl because I am a girl. And that's not something that I should be ashamed of. So I'm going to do it anyway. That's what they should do.
If I asked you to run like a girl now, would you do it differently?
I would run like myself.
Would you like a chance to redo it?
Why can't run like a girl also mean win the race?
Okay, pretty powerful stuff, right? So, talk to me. What does this commercial represent to you in our discussion around self-states? What happened here? Did you see? It was a relate. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Right. Isn't that interesting?
They kind of like, but they were all young women. And then when they asked the girls to do that, they just did how they thought they needed to do it. They grew like they thought they would throw, they would run. And then it seemed like the younger girls had a better sense of what it meant to do those things as a girl as opposed to the adults. And the adults had to be reminded that you should just do it as you are. I do this way because I'm a girl.
Right. Yeah, good observation. So when it comes to self-states, that question of like a girl was a relational question, right? So they were enacting a script, and they enacted this certain part of themselves. But then when they were reminded, right, and encouraged to enact a different part of themselves, what happened? It was more empowered posture. They were enacting these different parts of themselves based on a relational cue. It was just a simple question. It wasn't any scripting around that. But they had this relational cue, and it enacted different parts of themselves. That's this idea of the self-state. Okay, so we'll continue to unpack that when we get into the couples therapy, because there's some interesting ways in which that emerges. Okay, so generally speaking, I'm not going to go over all of these, but here are the goals of psychodynamic psychotherapy. There is this misnomer in psychodynamic psychotherapy that there isn't a huge focus on symptom relief, but you can't work on the internal world when your external world is turned upside down or in chaos. And so any good course of psychodynamic psychotherapy is going to first treat symptoms. Let me give you an example of a case that I've been working on for probably 18 months now. This individual came to me after 2 hospitalizations, pretty significant hospitalizations. She was hospitalized for 2 weeks and 3 weeks, pretty much back to back, after a very serious suicide gesture, and has a pretty significant history of trauma, and had been triggered the months before her hospitalization based on a number of circumstances that were happening in her life. And it sent her onto a course of decompensation. But I knew, because of her significant trauma history, that this was going to be a long-term course of treatment, because I knew a little bit about some of the specific circumstances of her past. And it would require us, developing a trauma narrative, and her being able to retell her stories and all those sorts of things. But we were months, when I first started working with her, we were months away from our ability to do that, because she was on the heels of a really scary time in her life. And so the first 6 months of treatment were just to stabilize her. And we did a lot in the way of grounding and managing her self-destructive impulses, all of those sorts of things before we could even touch the reprocessing of her trauma. So symptom relief is certainly necessary in the process of psychodynamic psychotherapy. And interestingly enough, even when you don't necessarily focus on specific interventions to alleviate some of the symptoms, outcome studies have suggested that symptoms diminish as quickly as other forms of treatment and are often in conjunction with, this is the outcome literature related to psychodynamic psychotherapy, in conjunction with the solidification of the treatment alliance, and we'll talk about why that works and why even just focusing on the quality of the therapeutic relationship can help mitigate some pretty significant symptoms of mental illness, such as anxiety and pretty significant depression. And then once symptom relief has been provided to an adequate degree, a lot of patients, if you as a therapist are doing your part in educating them about the process of therapy, will likely stay in therapy for the benefit of growing and understanding themselves and just for their overall general mental health. So it goes beyond just the swift removal of a particular psychological disturbance, right? So insight, and not just knowledge, head knowledge, but emotional insight. Christopher Bollas talks about this idea of the unthought known. Have you heard of this term before? Where you have this experience, you know it is there, you don't, and I'm not talking about like a repressed memory or anything, but something that you know about yourself and your experience of others that you haven't really developed the language to describe yet, happens through the process of psychodynamic psychotherapy and putting you in touch with your transferential responses to the therapist, and also paying attention to the specific embeddedness of the relationship between the therapist and the patient. So insight is important. Agency is this idea of being the master of your own ship. It's an internal sense of freedom. Oftentimes people come to therapy because they have received or have experienced a compromise in their sense of agency, right? Haven't been able to figure out how to make this change in my life. I need the assistance of someone else to help me negotiate it. For example, being controlled by depressive disturbance, right? So people come to therapists oftentimes having a compromise to their sense of agency. And this is why the non-directive exploratory process of a psychodynamic therapist can have long-term benefit for the patient, because they've sort of figured out the problem on their own. It stays with them. They weren't given a list of things to do to solve the problem. You've equipped them through self-knowledge to be able to navigate the problem on their own. By the way, of course, you know, I'm obviously a strong proponent of this form of therapy, and so every chance I get, I'm gonna tell you all the advantages of psychodynamic psychotherapy and how they're superior to other forms of therapy. But we all know that the outcome literature points to one idea. Do you know what this idea is? It's the dodo bird effect. Have you heard this? All are winners and deserving of prizes. There's really not a difference. And out of all of the theoretical orientations. And really what matters the most are the non-specific factors, the relational factors. So it's how well you connect with your patient that matters the most. So the theoretical orientation becomes one sort of preference. You know, I've often said you don't choose the theory chooses you. And some of that has to do with exposure, right? So your supervisor and your professors and those sorts of things. And then the other point of influence is just your own sensibilities. What's going to click? What's going to make most sense to you? But one area in which I think psychodynamic psychotherapy maybe outplays the competition a bit is in the long-term effects. Usually in the outcome literature, there's pretty good returns on all forms of treatment at the end of treatment, but the sustainability of the gains therapeutically for individuals who have received, and I won't even say psychodynamic psychotherapy, let me be more general, depth therapies. So, I think a case could be made that EFT would be considered a depth therapy. Depth therapies usually have sustainable gains that are more effective than those theoretical orientations that primarily emphasize symptom reduction. Okay, let me say a couple of other things. This is sort of self-explanatory: identity, self-esteem, and recognizing and handling feelings. Gosh, I am moving slow. I'm sorry. Yeah, let me talk to you for a moment about this idea of recognizing and handling feelings. I think this is another area in which there's some misinformation about psychodynamic psychotherapy, that it's purely sort of this emotionally distant cerebral exchange where you've got the analyst who's sitting on the chair and the patient on the couch, blank slate or evenly suspended judgment or neutrality. And our forms of Freudian psychotherapy certainly have embraced those ideas. But the newer forms, the sort of the neo-Freudians or the relational psychoanalytic therapists certainly put a premium on connecting with the patient emotionally, recognizing and helping patients handle their feelings as they emerge. And then ego strength and self-cohesion, we'll talk about self-capacities and how they impact the marital relationship. Okay, you've seen this, right? You've seen the talking twin? I've lost my sock. And it's really funny. Talk to the hand. It's amazing how long they go. I love that. Isn't that so good? Yeah. I love this video for a number of reasons.